Okay, so allergy season has really been in major full swing here, so that's one reason why I don't have my contact lenses in today. I seem like I've had the watery eye, the runny nose thing going on for, well, it seems like forever, especially through the whole month of April. But I got an idea for this video based on a posting that came up in one of the online groups I'm in. And, well, it's actually the only online group I'm in these days. I made a video with the past about the anti-AA group drama, and I've just kind of minimized presence online. Plus, as far as arguing with other 12-steppers and other groups, well, I better just leave that alone for now because I could turn that into a whole nother video, and I don't want to meander too far off the topic. But it occurred to me not too long ago when I stumbled across this documentary online. It's a 1967 documentary about mental health. It's a mental health facility in, I believe it was in New England. I'm not sure if it was Massachusetts or Vermont, but it documented the mistreatment of the mentally ill and people who suffered with mental problems in a very, well, it's a very hard to watch kind of documentary as far as watching people being cruelly mistreated, denied basic hygiene and things of that nature. And I would like to say that it's gotten a lot better in the mental health system today, but I can speak with a little experience about state-run institutions, at least one particular state-run institution. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I do have some familiarity with that. It's not what I'm talking about is not a 12-step treatment center either. It was literally a state-run mental institution. It happened when I made an attempt on my own life, and I'm still not 100% ready to talk about that yet. Although I do believe a video needs to be made about that in the future because I think the stigma of people who suffer with a severe depression or people who have made an attempt on themselves, there's a lot of stigma that I went through as a survivor of that, and a stigma I've seen about people who have survived that type of thing that I think actually needs to be discussed or put out there more broadly. But again, I don't want to hijack the topic for this particular video by getting off into another subject entirely. But one thing it did get me to thinking about is that when it comes to advances in the mental health industry, there has been some progress. I'm not saying that the stigma of mental illness has been erased. I'm not saying that people are not still subject to outright persecution due to their mental illnesses. But I think in some kind of broader sense, in terms of being able to, we're a little bit more open about that in today's world. And I think that's actually a good thing. I know it's going to be strange for me to say this, but there's a lot of pluses to the modern world we live in. Too often times, if you're checking out social media or if you're checking out whatever somebody like the YouTubers, and I'm not picking on particular YouTubers, I'm just saying if you listen to, and both spectrums do this, by the way, but if you listen to certain political YouTubers on either sides of the aisle, or if you listen to some of the things you see on Twitter as far as the behavior people have towards one another, uh, oftentimes I see a focus on how terrible the world is now. And I really don't think overall, I think overall there's a lot to be said for the modern world, believe it or not. Like the ability to see videos like this, or like the fact of the matter is, a long time ago, I couldn't have tuned into YouTube and tuned into somebody like, say, Tegan Alexandra, who talks about narcissism and got the education I got about those kinds of personalities. I couldn't have done that 30 years ago. The most I could have done is maybe gone to a library and got a book on mental health and read about it. I don't think you could have had a public conversation when I was growing up about mental health the way that we can do now due to social media. Plus, with the advent of social media and places like this, I mean, people can put out messages and mass communication in ways that we couldn't have done a long time ago. But again, I'm getting into another topic entirely. And what I need to tie in here is the fact that when it comes to mental health, I am old enough to remember a time when, like in little social circles, if you had a bunch of people standing around talking, you would maybe in a little group environment, somebody would maybe point their finger like that at somebody standing in another circle, and they could say something like, You know what they're doing? You know what she's doing? She's seeing a psychiatrist. You know, she can't handle being a mother. She sees a psychiatrist, you know. And let me tell you what I heard, you know, that kind of thing. Or, you know, he's seeing a psychiatrist, you know. He actually had to go to a mental hospital because he got so screwed up at work. He was standing in the middle of the street screaming. That's how bad it was. Well, you know, I'm not saying that the world has moved past that, but I'm saying we know a lot more in the public consciousness, I think, outside of a few ignorant people. We know a little bit more about mental illness than we did, say, around the time of the 1980s when I was coming up. But what I was going to say in this video is that when it comes to mental health stigmas, Quackaholics Anonymous, or the cult religion of AA, is not really friendly towards people with mental health issues or mental health stigmas. In fact, it perpetuates the stigmas a whole lot more. The downside to having a lot of mass communication about the mental problems that people come up with is I see a lot of people carelessly use real terms that people really have problems with and they suffer with. I see them kind of throwing that out kind of casually. I'll point out some behaviors I saw in AA, and yes, some of this is not exclusive to AA, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Sometimes my mind goes real fast, you know. But for instance, I remember one time somebody in AA was talking about they struggled with or suffered with bipolar, and there was a group of old-timers standing around outside, and someone said, bipolar, that ain't nothing but a woman. You know, I saw an old-timer one time say, you know, anytime you see a woman posting a lot of selfies online, you know right then she's a narcissist. You know that there's something really badly wrong with her. That's why she posts selfies online. She's a narcissist and she's a whore and all that. I was like, look, just because you got some weird fucking mental hang-up about women that don't have a problem showing themselves off doesn't mean you get to diagnose people as being untreated narcissists, okay? You know, just because you know a mental health word, okay? It's funny, these people are usually, in terms of actually fitting profiles of narcissism, these people are like textbook cases, the way they're so grandiose in their fucking meetings and all that other kind of thing, but it's funny how they love to project that onto everybody else. It was like a lousy sponsor I had that literally was a manipulator, a user, a liar, everything you can possibly name bad about somebody. In terms of, I remember he was supposed to hold on to some money for somebody while they went to long-term alcoholic treatment. He stole all the money. I remember another situation where he screwed a sponsee over and caused that sponsee to end up in divorce court. But he would walk around in meetings and he would say things like, there's one thing I can't stand. There's one thing I can't really stand. I can't stand a liar. I can't stand a manipulator and a cheater. And I thought, this guy is like the lowest of the low when it comes to being a liar and a cheater. I mean, if you looked up subhuman scum in a dictionary, his picture would have been next to it. That's how lousy of a human being he was. But there are AA people that'll say, well, our own literature, the big book, it says that we only know a little, that you're inclined to get all the help you want. That's said in one little paragraph in their book. But if you look at the overall literature, especially in their big book, their 12 and 12 and all that other shit, they're very disparaging towards people seeking professional help outside of the 12-step cult religion. As a matter of fact, I would go so far to say that addiction as of itself, as far as the addiction industry, the industry that dominates alcohol and drug abuse, which is really a disgrace in some kind of ways, has probably set the mental health industry back, you know, a century at least, with all the garbage that they put out with as far as the default treatment centers for alcohol and drug abuse is 12-step treatment centers. I mean, and in popular pop culture and all that other kind of thing. What I was going to talk about is I've heard all kinds of disparaging marks, and I've heard testimony from other people in the group I'm with online. You know, you'll hear people in meetings often say something like, well, I wasted all that money on those shrinks, and I just found out I was an alcoholic that needed God. Or I've heard people say, you don't need antidepressant medication. Antidepressant medication is just you trying to change the way you feel. It's just you being a wimp, and you don't want to face reality or something like that. I remember a sponsor I had that said a person who suffered with depression, clinical depression, was just one of these wimps that needs a participation trophy in sports or something like that. It's just this high-handed, sanctimonious, judgmental shit that used to just turn me off to no end. I can say that I had a family member growing up. Back then, they did not call it bipolar. They called it manic depressive. I still see that term in use today, sometimes carelessly flung about on places like the Twitter sphere or something like that. But it was definitely something I couldn't diagnose, but it was something I always suspected he had. He was one of those people. He would have these episodes where he was like literally on a cloud nine. He was happy. He'd be in an elevator and he'd be making small talk with strangers. He would be making small talk with everybody on the streets. He was literally exuberant, and he would go from that to a complete suicidal meltdown in a depressive state where he felt like the entire world was collapsing all around him. And it's not something that you can... I know with his condition, and I'm pretty sure with anybody who suffers with a bipolar problem, they can tell you it's not something you can just snap out of just like that, or just immediately clap your hands and say, well, I'm just having some bipolar today. I'll be fine. I remember when I was court ordered into drug court, I talked about those long 3-hour sessions that they would force you to do in court ordered drug court. There was a guy, and this to me, by the way, I don't want to get too far ahead again, but this to me is very unconstitutional. But if you were in jail and you signed the papers to enter into drug court, they don't tell you all the little things that make drug court completely intolerable until after you've signed those papers. And of course, they can throw that in your face the whole time you're in drug court. Well, you signed the paper. But anybody who was on psychiatric meds, or anybody who was on antidepressants, anybody who was prescribed any medication, they were forced to drop off that medication while they were in drug court. In fact, there was one guy in the group I was in, we came into drug court together. He suffered from clinical depression. And I remember him literally sharing in front of the group one time. He said, I really do feel that my family and everybody would be better off if I just no longer was alive, if I was no longer in the world again. And of course, the fucking treatment center counselor, expert that the bastard was, he says, that's because you haven't written a gratitude list. That's because you hadn't got into the AA literature. I bet your sponsor wouldn't tolerate you acting like that. And fucking clinical depression can't be solved by a goddamn gratitude list. Join the 21st century and look up chemical imbalances and look up brain scans on the brain, like a book called Brain Lock that shows CAT scans on brain activity of people who suffer from OCD. But I could keep painting examples all day long, but I don't think there's nothing better than this list that was shared in a group by a guy. It was a bullshit list his sponsor gave him a long time ago. And of course, reading it reminded me of the sanctimonious fucking crap that I used to hear in those AA meetings. But it's 12 points about the differences between an AA sponsor and a therapist, because that's another thing that AA gets wrong. Everybody who goes to a therapist is not seeing a psychiatrist. Okay, you got psychiatrists, psychotherapists, counselors, etc., etc. And unfortunately, when it comes to alcohol and drug abuse, you got a lot of cult members without any real education or training, I don't think, that just went to a bunch of AA meetings and somehow or the other they became drug counselors. But before I go on too long, because if I get started, I'll get pissed off about this and I'll go all day. We'll have a 3-hour video here, a 3-hour marathon. But I'll read this bulleted point off, and the reason I'm reading it off is because I have heard these very exact sentiments said in AA, and when I'm done, I'll invite you to chime in on the comments and tell me what your experiences are with AA and the way it disparages mental health. But we'll start with the first one. It says, the difference between a sponsor and a therapist: your sponsor isn't all that interested in the reasons you drank. Well, that right there is a major fucking problem, because if you're not going to ever find out the reasons somebody might be abusing substances, how are you ever going to get to the root of the fucking problem? But that's not exactly true. Now, let's just be honest here. AA goes on and on and on about all the reasons you drank. Of course, it's archaic and outdated reasons, but it goes on with the fucking reasons. You're selfish, you're self-centered, you're in denial of reality, full flight from reality, you're bodily different from your fellows, the 7 deadly sins, fear, future events appearing real, blah, 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 with their phony, out-of-date, archaic garbage, pseudo-religious garbage. But that's what they go on about. They don't actually try to find real conclusions as to why you might have abused substances, because that would require actual intelligence, which is something a religious cult doesn't have. A religious cult just wants to shoehorn you into the category and make it and force you to fit into that category, whether you like it or not, or whether it helps you or not. The second on the list says, your therapist thinks the root of your problems is a lack of self-esteem, negative self-image, and poor self-concept. Your sponsor thinks your problem is a 4-letter word with no hyphens. Sanctimonious bullshit, to be honest with you. But if he's saying the 4-letter word is self, well, guess what? Negative self-image, poor self-esteem, lack of self-esteem, poor self-concept, guess what that all ties into? Self. It doesn't imply that sitting in meetings and talking about, oh, I'm selfish today, or so I went to a meeting and I made some coffee and I told the newcomer that he's going to relapse and die because most people don't make it. That's not really getting outside of self. That's just you being a narcissistic, abusive asshole and saying that you understand self. You don't understand self if you can't examine it. I used to hear an AA guy that would say all the time, just like the philosopher said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Well, you can't examine your life if you got a pair of blinders on and you're looking at it through a tunnel like this, and the only answers you can get from examining your life is AA bullshit. Okay. The next one says, your therapist wants to pamper your inner child. Your sponsor thinks it ought to be spanked. Oh, give me a break. You know, they're so arrogant. They're so, they're so tough, you know, with their talk and everything. For one thing, you've been watching too much, I was about to say Donahue, I would have been dating myself. You've been watching too much Dr. Drew bullshit if that's what you think every therapist does. Every therapist doesn't say, nurture your inner child. And as far as a sponsor saying it ought to be spanked, what you're admitting to is saying that your sponsor likes to bully you. Say, oh, you're just a worthless human being. You know, really give it to you like that, you know, because that's what sobriety's all about, you know. And by the way, let's just say there is truth to the inner child thing. Why would a sponsor want to spank an inner child? You know, I've heard people say if you use the word what you're really saying, you're trying to straw man somebody. Well, it's not really a straw man when you admit that you want to spank someone's inner child. You're saying you want to bully. I mean, is this a pro-therapy list or is this a pro-sponsor list? I'm kind of confused at this point. Your sponsor thinks your inventory should be about you, not your parents. Okay, here we go again. You're ripping off what you know about psychiatry from TV. Okay, not every therapist that's out there talks to you about your parents, although I'd like to point out that maybe examining what happened to you in childhood, examining what happened in relations to your parents, might just be an actual key into understanding why you had a substance abuse problem to begin with. A therapist doesn't say it's all to blame on your parents. Not necessarily. I mean, CBT therapy that I had a little of when I was in, believe it or not, it was through the church. It was through a thing called Church Health Center, which is not a church, but what it is, it's an organization that does like a charity service for people who are indigent. Like you can see, like if you're a homeless person, you can go to a doctor there. Or if you're, you know, indigent, you don't have any source of income, sometimes you could get some free outpatient program stuff. I actually tried that with a therapist. It was a CBT type approach. Strangely enough, the guy was an intern. If I had tried a seasoned therapist, he'd have probably spouted 12-step bullshit to me. But the CBT thing he did after like 7 or 8 sessions or something like that, it had nothing to do with my parents. It had nothing to do with me being a 5-year-old. It had nothing to do with any of that kind of thing. It had something to do with the present right here and now, like trying to not panic, trying to not catastrophize. It had nothing to do with being about your parents. So again, here we are strawmanning people into this TV pop psychology reality that doesn't exist. Next on the list says, speaking of your parents, your sponsor tells you not to confront them, but to apologize to them. Well, first of all, no therapist that I'm aware of tells you to confront your parents. And by the way, let's say somebody grew up in an abusive household where their parents beat on them or sexually assaulted them and made their childhood a living, horrifying nightmare, and that's why they turned to substance abuse. This sponsor's just going to say, you need to go apologize to your parents because you became addicted to substances, and because you're an alcoholic, you need to apologize to your parents. This is more outdated, archaic thinking from this notion that your parents are always right. This is this outdated notion that somehow you owe your parents because you became an alcoholic. Well, I don't want to use the term alcoholic because it's not a real term, but because you abused alcohol or because you abused drugs, you somehow owe your parents an apology. I mean, what are you supposed to say to your parents? I'm sorry I was born. Is that what they want you to say? I don't even get that. That's not even worth dwelling on, you know? Jump to the next list. The only time your sponsor uses the word closure is before the word mouth. Well, yeah, that's natural because every AA old-timer bully and asshole sponsor wants you to be quiet while he does all this talking and all this preaching and all this browbeating and all this gaslighting towards you, and you're supposed to sit there. It reminds me of all these meetings when these old-timers are like, when I got here, they told me to take the cotton out of my ears and put it in my mouth. And when we want to hear from the disease, we call on you, Fuck you. I mean, you think that being a bullying asshole towards people is really going to help them recover from their substance abuse disorder? Don't you think that most people, by the time they make it to an AA cult religious meeting, have had enough mistreatment and abuse at the hands of the system, at the hands of everybody around them because of the fact that they're screwing up on drugs and alcohol, and now you're going to tell them, just shut up so that you can talk? I never will forget a sponsor I had one time. He was right in the middle of one of his freaking stories, and somebody it was like a meeting after the meeting kind of situation. Somebody pointed out something or just mildly interrupted. It wasn't like they just cut him off or something like that, and he was just in this dreamy, starry-eyed, and then this happened, and then I knew in that moment. And when somebody kind of just said something that kind of distracted from his acting, he just got this really ugly look of seething hatred on his face. Can't interrupt me when I'm talking about my spiritual experience that I made up because of something I probably saw in a movie somewhere, The next on the list says your sponsor thinks boundaries are things you need to take down, not build up. Let me translate that. Your sponsor thinks that boundaries are something you need to take down so he can run all over you and manipulate you. You ever heard that bullshit about you're never supposed to say no in AA because AA saved your life? Well, bullshit. You don't have to give up your independence just because you had a problem with drinking. You don't have to give up your boundaries. Maybe lack of boundaries is what led to your substance abuse to begin with. Maybe not saying no to the wrong people who were steam railroading you throughout life, maybe that had a problem to do with your substance abuse. Maybe you need to be putting up more boundaries. Maybe people who are severely addicted to substances have allowed themselves to be manipulated and abused because they weren't thinking and in their right mind when it happened to them. And now you're telling them, oh no, you got to take down all your boundaries. You got to let the AA cult religion railroad you, roll over you, steamroll you, because you can't have any boundaries because you're just an alcoholic after all. Bill W. didn't give a flying fuck about helping alcoholics, okay? He hated anybody who had a drinking problem. It's evident in his cruel, sadistic fucking program. I'm getting a little worked up with this, but it's so annoying, Let's see. Your therapist wants you to love yourself first. Your sponsor wants you to love others first. Well, that in of itself is such a horribly, patently stupid thing to say that I almost don't even need to comment on that. Your sponsor wants you to love others first. So you're supposed to care about other people that may not care about you at all, but not love yourself at all. For what reason exactly? Because you made poor choices in life? Because you drank too much? Because you did drugs? Because you made some bad decisions and ended up in some bad situations? You're not allowed to love yourself? There's a sly, underhanded tactic going on here when you go to an AA meeting and they say something like, we'll love you until you can learn to love yourself. Maybe I don't want you to love me. Maybe your definition of love is twisted. Your definition of love is be subservient, tell all your dirty secrets to some egomaniac that's going to spread it around and gossip about you, make coffee for people, and be looked down on and kiss up to the ruling hierarchy. That's your definition of love. If that's your definition of loving me till I can learn to love myself, I'd hate to see what your definitions of hatred and mistreatment and abuse and bullying are. We're almost to the end of this, by the way. Your therapist prescribes caretaking and medication. Your sponsor prescribes prayer making and meditation. Caretaking and medication is not always a given with a therapist. Some therapists can't even give you medication. But taking care of yourself after abusing yourself with drugs and alcohol or whatever it is, that's actually a smart route to go. It's actually also a smart route to go if you realize that you're having all kinds of problems mentally up here and you need help for those problems, and maybe you do need medication. There's no shame in being prescribed medication. There's no shame in taking an antidepressant. There's no shame in any of that. This is actually trying to paint you and paint therapy and paint anybody who seeks professional help as an inherently weak person because what? You might be put on medication? Because you might want to take care of yourself after you've abused yourself? There's nothing wrong with that at all. But no, your sponsor wants you to pray for the obsession to be removed and sit in meetings. And what meditation? I never saw anybody in AA talk about meditation. You know, whenever it was brought up, if you brought up in a meeting, how do you meditate? They might say something like, read pages 86, 87, 88, or whatever the fuck those pages are. Phone's ringing here, but I'm going to keep going a little longer. That's not really meditating. Meditating is not dwelling on how you can be a more obedient cult member, okay? Dwelling on what a failure you are and how you need to be subservient to the AA cult is not what I would call meditation. And I don't know what they talk about in terms of prayer. Their book is full of prayers, but it's not, you know, like what's that one about? I give myself to you to do with whatever you want. No, don't think so. I'm not going to do that. I'm not giving myself up to AA to do with whatever they want. Or there's that one about put aside everything I know. Put aside everything I think I know. No, not going to do that. I've learned a lot of things in my life. I've learned a thing or two. I may not be a genius, but I ain't going to give up all the things I've learned and give it over to a bunch of morons to do my thinking for me. Sorry. Your sponsor thinks anger management skills are numbered 1 through 12. Well, here you've made a big giant presumption. Everybody doesn't need anger management skills. I've seen a lot of people in AA over the years that would sort of slip in and slip out of the system of their cult religion that were the most soft-spoken, humble, meek, quiet kind of people. They never talked in meetings. You could tell they were very anxious. You could tell they were very nervous. You could tell they were very, very introverted. You could tell they didn't do well in these group environment kind of things. And they are the exact opposite of self-will run riot. They're the exact opposite of someone with an anger problem. They're the exact opposite of someone with justified anger. Or what is it they call it in their stupid book? The dubious luxury of other men and women. I never knew of anybody that called anger a dubious luxury, but then again, they're twisted about everything in their definitions. But these people were not angry people who needed anger management. But that's what happens when you live in a cult religion that speaks in absolutes. You know, we all got a problem with anger. Now, speak for yourself. Don't speak by proxy for me, you know. And then let's see. Now that you haven't had a drink in 6 months, your therapist wants you to make a list of goals and objectives for the next 5 years and finish up getting that college degree. Your sponsor thinks you should start today by cleaning coffee pots, dumping ashtrays, and helping him carry that heavy box of literature to the jail. Oh my God. Naturally, you just made an admission right there. You don't want people to get better. You don't want people to go after college degrees. You don't want people to put their lives in order and move on. No, you want them to be obedient little slaves to the sponsor and take the books to the jail. And let me tell you something. I followed a guy to a big book meeting in jail one time, and it was... Let me tell you what they do when they go to those jails, at least the ones I went to. They stand up there, they brag about what big badasses they were. They throw out a few legal terms that they probably heard on television. You know, like, you know, and then the 5-0 is coming after me. Nobody on the streets, by the way, I ever knew of used the term 5-0 to talk about cops, okay? But you'll hear them do that. They stand up there. They know these inmates in these jail cells can't talk back to them because they could get in trouble, and they run their mouths, and it's really one big thing like speaker meetings. It's them standing up there, advertising the best of all of them, and forcing everybody to listen to it. They're not helping nobody in them fucking jails. They're feeding their own egos is what they're doing. But I think it's funny that they admit that if you're getting better, if you haven't had a drink in a long time, rather than turning your eyes to the future, rather than turning your eyes to life ahead, life after drinking, they want you to scrub out ashtrays and walk behind the the sponsor with your head lowered down, carrying heavy literature, and saying, well, yeah, I'll always do what my sponsor told me. I remember one that was always saying, we used to call the sponsees pigeons. And I'm like, who the fuck are you? Are you in charge of some notorious prison gang here that's got foot soldiers doing your deeds? I mean, give me a break with your fake badassery. The last one says, your sponsor won't lose his license to practice if he talks about God. Did you know there are actually Christian-based therapy recovery centers? I'm not talking about like the Celebrate Recovery, but I'm talking about, I drive by a place on my way to work. It's got a big sign that says Christian Counseling, and I'm pretty sure they browbeat people with the Bible and all that other kind of thing. But a therapist isn't going to lose their license because they talk about God. A therapist is going to lose their license if they try to treat a mental health case with religion. You think if somebody comes to somebody and they say, I have bipolar or I have OCD, and they say, well, you just need to pray about that. You just need to pray. That's what your problem is. You're born bad, and you just need to pray about it. Yeah, they're going to lose their license because it's quackery. It's quackery, and it doesn't help anybody. It's outdated quackery. It has nothing to do with people getting better. But all of this proves that AA doesn't care anything about people's mental health. It doesn't care about you getting better. It doesn't care about you putting a period at the end of your time when you were drinking and doing all the things you were doing and moving on. It just wants subservient cult members, and most importantly of all, it doesn't want you to question the way the structure works. It doesn't want you to look around the room one day and say, you know what, these fucking weirdos, they shouldn't be telling me how to live my life. They're miserable pricks that are sitting in here running their mouths about DUIs that they probably never got in the 1970s, and I don't think that these people have my best interest at heart. They certainly can't have you thinking for yourself or looking outside the box of the boundaries of the cult religious program, because then you might actually be able to look around and say, I don't think I want to be involved in this. I think I want to do what the therapist list says. I want to go get my degree again. I want to put my life back together after destroying it with drugs and alcohol. I want to put the bottle down and stop making terrible decisions, and I want to clean up my act and have a better life and a future ahead of me. They certainly don't want you to do that. They want you to scrub ashtrays and make coffee and be eternally grateful to the cult religion that doesn't even save your life. You're the one who quits drinking. You're the one who puts the drugs down. You're the one who doesn't go to the liquor store. You're the one who doesn't turn up the drink at the end of the day. They're just stealing all the credit for what you're doing. Anyway, this is like 32 minutes, so I talked way too long for this one. But anyway, let me know in the comments below if you've had any experiences like this with the disparaging remarks that AA does about mental health. And I'll see you again next time.